Koonic seeks Director of Major Gifts and Planned Giving to advance philanthropic support. Learn more at knba.org. Koonic seeks a General Manager of Media to lead content and operations. Learn more at knba.org.
Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Many of the original Route 66s, nearly 2,500 miles from Chicago to the Pacific Ocean, cut through Native American land. The road is marking 100 years in operation this year, and we'll take the opportunity to look at how it changed Native business and culture over that time. In its heyday, it beckoned early road trippers with billboards and neon signs. That legacy remains in many ways as a new generation of motorists drive the same route. We'll hear more after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Brian Bowles, sitting in for Antonia Gonzalez. Protecting tribal sovereignty is the top discussion at the National Congress of American Indians 2026 winter session, which is taking place this week in Washington, D.C. NCAI President Mark Maccaro highlighted the importance of tribal sovereignty in a State of Indian Nations address. Maccaro says before there was a U.S., there were sovereign tribal nations.
Our sovereignty was not created by treaties, nor granted by Congress. It is inherent and existed before colonization. Treaties did not give us sovereignty, they recognized it. The Constitution did not define us, it acknowledged us. Federal laws did not create our rights, it memorialized them. And yet, for centuries, our sovereignty has been attacked, and attempts continue to constrain and diminish it. Yet our nations continue to govern, continue to lead, to teach, to resist, and to rise.
Maccaro says recent attacks include calls by Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt to limit tribal sovereignty, which Maccaro says is appalling. Tribal leaders in Oklahoma agree with Maccaro's sentiment. Reggie Wassernae is governor of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma.
This day and age, we shouldn't have to ask why tribes have a sovereignty. We shouldn't have to ask what the tribe's capabilities are, how they can function, how they can prosper, and who are tribes. That should not be asked today.
Wassernae and Maccaro say tribal leaders are often educating elected officials about American Indian history, tribal sovereignty, and the U.S. government's trust and treaty responsibilities. Before every census, the federal government picks several test sites focusing on hard-to-reach areas. But the Bureau has canceled that testing at 4 of the 6 regions, including 2 that cover Arizona tribal lands. As KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrorazio reports, this isn't the first time the census has changed course with Indian country.
In fact, this also happened in 2016, when 2 reservations in Washington and South Dakota were nixed, citing budget uncertainty and funding shortages.
Now we're in 2026.
That's census consultant Sandra Mitrovich, who co-leads the Natives Count Coalition. She's also a member of the Berry Creek Rancheria of Maidu Indians of California.
In the last 2 decennials, not only have we had the undercount, but we've had this cancellation of test sites for tribal areas twice.
Mitrovich says one concern is that the Trump administration is considering to use Postal Service staff to replace temporary census workers to conduct the count and cut down on costs.
A lot of households are left invisible to the census, and they also have non-traditional addresses.
In 2020, the nonprofit Native American Rights Fund reported that more than 80% of all registered indigenous voters in Arizona outside of Metro Phoenix and Tucson rely solely on P.O. boxes. This time around, San Carlos and White Mountain Apache homes in Arizona, as well as Cherokee households in North Carolina, are being left out. The Census Bureau would not say why.
And how are we going to say that we're going to carry out this fair and full representation that this survey is supposed to provide of the country?
For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrorazio.
And on this day in 1978, the longest walk by Native activists began. A startup ceremony took place on Alcatraz Island, where the group then proceeded to travel by foot from Sacramento to Washington, D.C. to build awareness of treaty rights and injustice. This is National Native News. I'm Brian Bull.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Skugtash. For more than 40 years, Ramona Farms has revived ancient traditional foods, tepary beans, pinoli, polentas, and more, all from store.ramonafarms.com. Ramona Farms supports this show. Tomye. Tribal Development Partners, helping tribes build toward their goals through 105L leasing and essential facility development, empowering sovereignty, strengthening community. More at tribaldevpartners.com, proud supporters of this show.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. This year is the 100th anniversary of Route 66. The iconic stretch of highway goes from Chicago to Santa Monica, California, and passes through more than 24 tribal lands. It redefined what it meant to travel and be a tourist in America. For tribes, it ushered in a pivotal tourism economy and created lasting impacts on how Native communities identify themselves and sometimes cater to Western concepts of noble Indians. In New Mexico, the Mother Road, as it's also called, passes through several reservations, including Laguna Pueblo and Acoma Pueblo, and skirts the edge of the entire southern border of the Navajo Nation. They're among many tribes and communities acknowledging and celebrating the journey that Route 66 has taken them in the last 100 years. How has your community been impacted by Route 66? How is your community acknowledging Route 66's 100th anniversary? Let us know. You can join the conversation. Just call 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from Albuquerque, New Mexico is Ron Solomon. He is the owner of Solomon Business Development and Strategy and a board member for the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development, and he's also the board chair of Laguna Community Foundation. He is, of course, Laguna Pueblo. Ron, Guatsi brother, great to have you on the show today.
Guatsi Umo. It's good to be on the show with everyone that's on and everyone that's listening. Certainly greetings from Laguna and from New Mexico to all the rest of you out there that are listening in today. Good to be with you all.
Right on. Thank you, Ron, and acknowledging our many listeners all across Indian country. Also in Albuquerque today, we have Dr. Troy Lavata. He is a professor of archaeology in the University of New Mexico Honors College. Troy, hello, and welcome to Native America Calling.
Hello. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for this opportunity to talk to everybody. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And joining us from City Hall in Gallup, New Mexico is Dolene Santillanes. She is the Marketing and Projects Coordinator for the City of Gallup Tourism Department and a new board member for the New Mexico Route 66 Association. She is Dene. Dolene, good morning. Great to have you on the show as well.
Hello, Yat A from Gallup, New Mexico.
Yate. Great to have you, Dolene, along with all of our other guests. And Ron, I want to begin with you because, of course, Route 66, it passes through our Laguna Pueblo homelands. What do we know about how Lagunas first viewed the construction of this road?
Well, one of the things I think that's key is that the pathway for the Route 66 was an ancient pathway in the past for our people going down to the Rio Grande Valley. And so that's how, there was already demarcation lines, I'm sure. If you looked through infrared photography or other means, you would see the pathway to and through Laguna Pueblo and also through Acoma Pueblo as well. So, that has kind of a historic utilization associated with it, and we were able then to capture opportunities relative to that, eventually what was referred to by my tribal leaders or our tribal leaders as a corridor of commerce. And being a corridor of commerce, means that you would eventually have some business activities and operations along that same pathway. And we weren't able to capture that in the early 1900s as quickly as we might have wanted to, but we have eventually done that. So I'll leave that to a little bit later in the show, Sean, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, absolutely, Ron. Now, of course, there was already a railroad that had been established a couple of decades before Route 66 construction began. So obviously Laguna people were already, being exposed to a lot of different types of people, and there was a lot of traveling going through our lands. What did it do in terms of our own mobility, though, as people? Were we able to travel more and go other places because of this infrastructure?
Yes, definitely. People that were in business, say in the livestock business out at Laguna, and I have family that were sheep owners in the past, and the route, the most expeditious route for a lot of them, because of the roads that were available to them at that time, were down through State Road 6, down toward Los Lunas, and then back up into Albuquerque. So that really provided another direct pathway once it became an established roadway through New Mexico that allowed us to go right down into Albuquerque with that long 9-mile hill. That was always a challenge for the older cars and trucks, the old flatbeds that people would haul sheep in or haul wool in, that sort of thing, and grandma too as well. I had great grandparents that used to travel those roads, both Route 66 and the old and State Road 6 that goes down to the southeastern and on the southeastern pathway to Los Lunas and Belen, where they did a lot of business there. They did their banking down there, and this was in the late 1800s and early 1900s.
Ron, my great-grandfather had a trusted horse, and he used to tell stories to relatives about traveling back and forth from Laguna to Albuquerque, Puati Village, and he could fall asleep on that horse, and that horse just knew to guide him all the way home. And I'm sure you have relatives the same way. But around that time when Route 66 was established, did a lot of Laguna people own automobiles?
Well, there were a few that owned automobiles, and like I mentioned, my great-grandfather from Casablanca owned an automobile, and his younger children would actually take the helm and drive him down to do business both in Los Lunas, Belen, and Albuquerque. And so he was one of the few. It was one of those kind of gangster-looking cars, one of that a beautiful blue color with those big headlights. And so my grandmother, one of his granddaughters, maternal grandmother, she was one that drove him down to Albuquerque and those areas. So yeah, he owned the car, but he really didn't drive the car. He had other people that did that for him. And then, of course, that pathway that you're talking about, took many paths and many directions out of the different villages. And at Laguna we have 6 villages that really exist out there today, and there's roadways that lead down to the artery roads like State Road 124 and State Road 379 that come down into and converge with Interstate 40 now, which is still along the pathway of both the railroad, which was Santa Fe Railroad, and then eventually AT&SF, and then other BNSF railroads that came through there. So that really became a major artery for people also that were becoming educated and had jobs here in Albuquerque. And then, of course, eventually people moved down here to Albuquerque and were about 45 to 50 miles, depending on where you're going in the city, away from Laguna. And the Laguna tribal lands actually begin 19 miles outside of the city of Albuquerque. So it was convenient for them to go back and forth, and then they eventually, like I said, chose to live here and rent and or buy homes here in the city. So nowadays there's 1,400 of us approximately that live here in the city of Albuquerque, and among other tribal nations that comprise, about 12% of the city's population. And these are tribes from all over the country that have found Albuquerque to be a very welcoming place to raise their families and to be a part of a larger community. So that's, essentially, the utilization of the road was basically as a pathway for jobs that they were able to obtain in the city of Albuquerque. And then it also became one of the reasons that Albuquerque was able to establish a Laguna colony of people, just like we did for the early part of the century, wherein Laguna established colonies of Laguna people that worked for the Santa Fe Railroad Company out in Gallup and Winslow and Barstow and Richmond, California. So Albuquerque established its own colony, but not really with the railroad job opportunities as the fundamental basis. It was other jobs within the federal government and private companies. And as you know, and as many of us know, no matter where you live, I always refer to Laguna as home. And that sort of befuddles people, and they say, well, we thought you lived in Albuquerque. And well, I do live in Albuquerque, but my home is at Laguna. It's kind of like your home is where your heart is. So that pathway is utilized every single day by people from Laguna coming into Albuquerque to taking care of doctor's appointments, other kinds of business, and then heading right back home. And it's just the reverse for the Lagunas that live here. When we have traditional ceremonies or other kinds of family activities, we head out to Laguna, and fortunately, it's a quick ride, provided that there's no impediments to us getting out there.
Okay. All right, Ron, we got to have to take a short break. We'll come back. We'll talk more with Ron and our other guests, and we have the phone lines open for listeners, 1-800-996-2848. At 24 years old, McKaylin Peters serves as the executive director of the Menominee Tribe of Wisconsin. At the same time, she's pursuing a master's degree at Johns Hopkins University. Peters is one of the Center for Native Youth's 2026 Champions for Change that recognizes inspiring young leaders across the country. We'll speak with her and other champions on the next Native America Calling.
Support by the American Indian College Fund. The American Indian College Fund provides millions of dollars of scholarships to thousands of Native students every year. Tribal citizens of every age and experience are eligible. The deadline for applications is May 31st, and you can find everything you need to apply at collegefund.org. That's collegefund.org, or by phone at 800-766-FUND. Education is the answer.
Thanks for tuning in today to Native America Calling. Route 66 goes through the lands of more than 24 tribes. Today we are talking about how this iconic stretch of highway has impacted those communities over the past 100 years. Give us a call. You can join this conversation. We are at 1-800-996-2848. I know we have a lot of listeners in these tribal lands with whom or where Route 66 traveled through. So join the conversation. Let us know what you remember about the early days of Route 66, stories maybe you have been told, or your own personal experiences. Again, that number, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Let's bring Dr. Troy Lavatta into the conversation now. He is a professor of archaeology at the University of New Mexico. And Troy, Route 66, this was a very ambitious project, and it's interesting because it began around the same time that automobile travel was becoming more common in the United States. What were the roads like in the U.S. before Route 66?
Yeah, that's a good question because, we think about it as this paved superhighway, and then eventually becomes a lot of Interstate 40 after Route 66 is decommissioned. But the roads were rough, and that's the thing. We think about automobiles developing, and Ron mentioned, like people starting to buy vehicles in the early 20th century, but it was hard to drive. Getting across a big chunk of the country was considered a real undertaking, and so basically Route 66 tried to follow other things that already existed and piece them together, but it was quite a while before the whole thing was even paved. You've got some places like La Bajada, which is between Albuquerque and Santa Fe, that was considered for the early, because Route 66 has been rerouted a few times, one of the early routes of it, that was so rough that old Model Ts couldn't go up in their forward gears. They had to go up in reverse. They also often, people on Route 66 would pay people to drive up La Bajada for them because all the curves and that dirt rocky road, they weren't sure of themselves driving their own cars. So, yeah. Now, there were, the railroads were there before, and, of course, railroads need to be a lot less of an incline. And one of the things was this back and forth between, you had the more flatter inclines for railroads, and is that where you put the road, or do we move things and see if we can make cars go better? So,
Troy, looking at a map of Route 66 originally, it's interesting how it really zigzagged kind of north and south and went through different communities up, like you mentioned, Santa Fe, and then cut down to Albuquerque across towards Gallup. When it came to native lands, Indian reservations, how was road construction negotiated?
Yeah, it's not something I'm a real expert on, but some of this was because it was negotiated already for state highways. And so it started there and trying to piece things together in that way. I'm not a real expert on the actual, the one-on-one negotiations between different tribes and pueblos. But one of the things was, if you've got a road, you jumped to try and get better. Route 66 started out of this thing that was called the Good Roads Program. And the idea was that, we had all these roads across the U.S., but it was not easy to travel. And it was actually so much easier to travel by train. One of the early pushes for better roads was actually bicycles because they could travel further and better. There were actually things like bicycle races across the U.S. to take advantage of those roads. So if you had a good road, you tried to participate. And here at New Mexico, they tried to get money to get their roads better because they knew it was going to be something not just to bring people from the outside, but inside as well.
Troy, tell us more about how Route 66 impacted entire towns along the way, economically, culturally, socially.
Yeah. And for me, my background, although that economic impact is part of culture, it's not the only part of culture. And it really impacted it in an interesting way. Ron mentioned that idea of, you were a place like Laguna, which is not far from Albuquerque. But, early in the 20th century, late 19th century, it wasn't quick travel like today. And so one of the impacts was just opening things up. And we often think of somebody from somewhere else driving across on Route 66, but it really was about you had this road in front of you and you could go places, you could visit other people nearby or far, and then you could also get exposed to people. And that exposure is interesting because it kind of makes you define yourself in some ways. One of the train travel, and got mentioned, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, Fred Harvey pushed the idea of train travel as tourism, not just to get somewhere, but to stop along the way. And he brought in a lot of native peoples to sell native goods. opened up a whole range of curio shops. He opened up a whole bunch of hotels with those involved. And when you start doing that, you start thinking about what it means to sell your crafts and to kind of define your culture. You had some interesting examples, things like, do you make pottery for yourself or someone else? And what does it look like? And how do you do it? So that whole process is a pretty interesting cultural definition. You kind of, when you think about what you are and who you are, you start thinking like, yeah, what do people want? And what do I want to show for myself? And how do I talk about it? One of them that's kind of interesting is a lot of places, some of the travelers really wanted to see traditional dances, traditional feast days. And there were discussions within different groups, different tribes and pueblos of, do we become public and let people just show up? Or do we, keep this for ourselves? And how do we work that process? And pretty early on, some of them decided, hey, we'll open it up. And some of them said, no, this is internal. And both of those are about defining your culture and kind of thinking about what you are.
That's a really interesting point to think about, Troy. Ron, I want to bring you back in because do you remember or can you reflect on maybe similar conversations that occurred at Laguna with regard to, well, to what extent do we open our village to outsiders and to what extent do we need to remain closed off?
Well, those kinds of discussions really were enhanced by our experience with the railway coming right through Laguna at one time, and that being a major stop. So our people were used to doing things like, selling items to the travelers that would, they'd have to stop to get. This is back in the locomotive days. So our people became used to eventually selling potteries or the containers with which they would offer, up to the tourists in the trains. They would offer fruit. They would offer fruit pies. They would offer tamales, whatever they had made. And so eventually, as Troy mentioned, folks then became interested in the vessels in which those kind of food items and others were being offered. So, and then, of course, during those times, there were times when they would be coming through during a feast day or traditional dances. And so, people wanted to sort of get up and go wander into the village. And at that time, it was more relaxed and open. And what happened was there were basically one too many pictures taken of, sacred things at the time. And then that kind of openness kind of closed off for a great deal of time, both for the railroad passengers and then also for folks that are coming through on Route 66. So that became a cultural management kind of issue for our pueblo. And, even up through today, even those of us that are Laguna, if we have a cell phone on us, that's kind of a ready-made combination of telephone and camera. And so we have prohibitions against that, and they can be confiscated. And that's, rightfully so when you think about it, because people really no one should really be taking photos of any kind of sacred objects or ceremonies that we have. And so it's been a quick exposure, both from the railroad standpoint and then Route 66, both of which passed right around the village of Old Laguna. I mean, physically, we're right there next to everything that was happening from a day-to-day standpoint, and then on those special occasions when traditional activities are taking place. So it's been a debate, and it gets refined, every time there is some issue that arises relative to the admissibility of folks into the tribal lands. And
thanks,
especially
Ron.
The villages. You bet.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Well, we'll travel down Route 66 a little bit further west. Let's go now to Gallup, New Mexico, where we have Darlene Santillanes at City Hall. And again, she is the marketing and projects coordinator for the City of Gallup Tourism Department and also a new board member of the New Mexico Route 66 Association. And Darlene, let's talk about Gallup. How impactful was Route 66 in the development and evolution of that city? And also, what are some lasting effects of the road and its connection to Gallup's identity?
Well, Gallup is much older than Route 66. So Gallup is, what's the best way to describe this? Gallup is known as Nana George, and that is the bridge. And it's where many native cultures came to trade. I believe a long walk passed through here. There's many historical things that happen throughout time here at Gallup, pre-existing Route 66, encompassing Route 66, and we're looking forward to the future of Route 66 here in Gallup. So we're definitely having a lot of the Route 66 Americana culture embedded with Gallup, but we also have our own culture here in Gallup that is rooted in Native American culture that surrounds us. So those cultures really root us down here in Gallup, and they keep us very humble, but they help us also be adaptable, and we're able to adapt right away. And I feel very blessed to live in Gallup and be right on the route and able to help our town, help people visit our town and experience the beauty that we have here in Gallup, both on Indigenous land as well as non-Indigenous land. It's extremely beautiful here. And I believe that it's like that in many places across Route 66, especially in places where there are native lands and open spaces. So beautiful.
Mm-hmm. What I think is really fascinating too is, of course, Route 66. That's the signs are there. Their main thoroughfare there through Gallup is still referred to as Route 66, as opposed to maybe other parts of Route 66 that have been taken over by other roads. But anyone who ever travels to Gallup, you see the hotels, the historic buildings. Tell us more about some of these landmarks and how their early years are connected to Route 66.
Gallup has very, very awesome points of interest as far as Route 66 places that you would like to visit. And some of them are directly associated with national points of interest, such as like the Muffler Man. The Muffler Man has been placed in several different garages or automotive sites, shops all across Route 66, and Gallup happens to have one. He is at John's Auto Sale, and we get travelers that come just to see the Muffler Man. I believe his name is Dude Man, and he is right next to Jerry's Cafe. Jerry's Cafe is also based on Route 66. Gallup has when you drive into Gallup, we have about 13 miles of Route 66. And when you hit downtown, we have what is called the East and West Y. And back in the day, back in the heyday, as they say, that's when Gallup had Route 66 go one way and then Route 66 go another way. So there were two one-way streets, and that would be the Front Street, which is Route 66, and then Cole Avenue, which is one block south of Route 66 in historic downtown Gallup. So the East and West Y is where our Route 66 actually turns into two streets, and we are able to celebrate Route 66 both on historic Route 66 and Cole Avenue. Cole Avenue has this amazing event space called Coast Street Commons, and that's where we come together to have many of our local festivities in Gallup, New Mexico. So we get to celebrate right on the route. A lot of our parades are right on Route 66. One of the oldest parades, it's the Gallup Intertribal Indian Ceremonial. It happens on a Thursday night and on a Saturday morning, the first week of August. And it's the most amazing parade, and you get to see all of the Native American tribes come down and perform on Route 66. It's the most beautiful thing ever. Both night and day parades are amazing. And we've been doing this here in Gallup for 104 years. The centennial is 100 years, so we've been here a long time in Gallup.
Absolutely. Darlene, what about the Navajo Nation? What was the impact there with Route 66 initially?
Well, it brought tourism to the Navajo Nation, and I believe it also brought a ton of modernization and industrialism to the Navajo people. We were able to adapt and progress, and even now we're definitely getting into bridging the digital divide, and many of us Navajos have become very progressive in how we interact through the internet on the digital highway. So, now we have the digital highway, we have the Old Trails Highway, and we have Route 66. So it's been very impactful both ways for the Navajo people as well as the Navajo people for Route 66.
We are talking with Darlene Santillanes, who is with the city of Gallup, New Mexico, reflecting on the significance of Route 66 there and the evolution of the city of Gallup, but also the Navajo Nation, which is very close to Gallup, New Mexico. And we have other guests on the show as well, of course. Ron Solomon with Laguna Pueblo, a long-term business leader and consultant across Indian country, reflecting on the significance of Route 66 to the people of Laguna Pueblo, and Dr. Troy Lavata, who is a professor of archaeology at the University of New Mexico, and he's giving us a lot of background as well with regard to the history of Route 66 and how it has impacted Native communities along the way. The phone lines are open right now, and let's get some calls going. I would really like to hear from some folks who maybe have some stories about Route 66 or just some insights with regard to how it has impacted their community or their people, or any other thoughts you would like to share. Maybe even ask a question with regard to Route 66, celebrating its 100th anniversary this year here in 2026. So the phone number to our studio in Albuquerque, New Mexico, it is 1-800-996-2848. Again, 1-800-996-2848, or just 1-800-99-NATIVE. That works too. The most important thing is to pick up that phone, call, join the conversation. And you can also connect with us on social media if you'd like to do it that way. Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, any of those platforms will work. But let's get a call or two going here. Again, 1-800-996-2848.
Support by the Gathering of Nations Powwow. The last dance is this April 24th and 25th at Expo, New Mexico. The Gathering of Nations Traders Market will be in the Creative Arts and Lujan buildings both days. Tickets available at gatheringofnations.com and at the gates.
Need help identifying community priorities? Kaufman & Associates' approach to evaluation is rooted in indigenous knowledge, honoring tribal history, and sovereignty. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
We're glad you're with us today here on Native America Calling. This year is the 100th anniversary of Route 66, the Mother Road, and we are talking about how it has impacted tribes along the way. How big is Route 66 tourism in your community? Has Route 66 tourism been a positive or negative influence for your community? Still time to join us if you call 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. And we have our first caller on the line right now. This is Elizabeth, who joins us from Albuquerque, New Mexico. She is listening to station KUNM. Hello, Elizabeth. How are you doing today?
I'm fine.
Well, tell us about your connection to Route 66.
Okay, I worked on a project which Ron Solomon knows about with Zuni Pueblo and their connection to Route 66, which is through an old trader named C.G. Wallace, of which there's a film about him. And I realized that the traders were very controversial, but they were a part of Route 66 phenomenon, bringing creating places for tribal people to sell and their work, their silver work, or their pottery, or the Navajo with rugs. Anyway, that's the reason I'm calling, just to say that there was a project also done with the De Anza Motel, which C.G. Wallace founded one of his 5 trading posts. The original one was in Zuni, and the other one was in Gallup on Route 66. And so I guess I'm calling to to say that Route 66 was very influential in many ways for the tribes, all the tribes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Elizabeth, for joining the conversation there, mentioning the connection Route 66 has to Zuni, and of course some of these native traders who set up businesses all along Route 66. Darlene Santianes, back to you. Route 66 Centennial, tell us more about what the City of Gallup has planned and what sorts of projects and undertakings you are engaged in right now to make all of this happen.
The City of Gallup has several projects underway, several events underway. I think at this point it's really special to highlight our upcoming Route 66 Rides event that happens on the last weekend of July. We will be featuring hot air balloons, a hot air balloon glow right on Route 66. We host fire dances at our town square. We have music, live music. We have a car show. It's a great time in historic downtown Gallup. It's a wonderful way to celebrate 3 blocks from Route 66 to Cole Street down to Aztec Avenue. The county and both counties, the city and our neighboring reservation tribes come and celebrate. It's a great time. And let's see, our new event, we have a new event coming up here in Gallup, and it's St. Patty's Day on Route 66, where we're looking to sponsor a scavenger hunt. And we're really hoping to bring in some new people to town and to try out our scavenger hunt in Gallup, New Mexico. We also want to make sure that we are supporting our longtime events. You heard me earlier mention the Gallup Intertribal Indian Ceremonial, but the City of Gallup has one special event called the Gallup Summer Indian Dances, formerly known as the Gallup Nightly Dances. The Gallup Nightly Dances was founded about 43 years ago in Gallup, New Mexico, and they had founded it to create entertainment, nightly entertainment for both the locals and for our visitors that were coming into Gallup during the summer evenings. When I recently had taken the position here at the City of Gallup, rebranding and reestablishing that event for the City of Gallup was probably one of the highlights of working for this city in the short time that I've been here. Since then, the Gallup Summer Indian Dances has been recognized by the state of New Mexico as an official Route 66 Centennial event. And we're very proud of that here. We're very proud to welcome motor tours to come. We're going to be teaming up with the National Historic Preservation Department and Rice Martin from the Oklahoma Route 66 Association and his group and the National Historic Preservation. They'll be bringing a caravan tour from Santa Monica to Chicago. They will be doing a direct stop here in Gallup, and I'm very happy to host them at the Gallup Summer Indian Dances. The Gallup Summer Indian Dances will take place between the first week of June to the first week of August, ending with the Gallup Intertribal Indian Ceremonial. Now, for our projects, we had some really good projects. We had some fun projects this past year. We recently had an award with the Top Hats Awards. We had, wasn't an award, it was more like we were recommended for award. We were a finalist for the Best Print Campaign for the Top Hat Award. Our print campaign was called Route 66 Hub City, Gallup, New Mexico. And it's an 8-page spread, and it talks all about Gallup and Route 66. It's a great way for visitors to learn about our outdoor recreation, our historic downtown, our wonderful public art. We've got amazing public art down here. And it also gives a little insight on 2 young Navajo women that are very special here in Gallup. Cajun Cleveland, she is the former Miss Indian Intertribal Indian Ceremonial, our Centennial Queen. She was the 100-year queen. And this year she is currently representing the Indian Rodeo Queen Association, and we're very proud of her. We also have Cecily Todicini, and she is currently organizing a skate a skate competition on Route 66 at the Gallup Skate Park during the Gallup Inter-Tribal Indian Ceremonial. And at that time, we get all different types of skateboarders from all different nations.
Right.
And then
Delene,
they come to Gallup. Yeah.
There is so much going on. You just have a full slate of activities. Wow, this is great. Thank you so much for keeping our listeners up to date here. We got to go back to the phones. We have another listener who'd like to join us. This is Michael, a regular frequent listener from Jemez Pueblo, who also tunes into the show on KUNM. Michael, hello, brother. Welcome.
Hey, how you doing there? Yeah, that's a great topic. I remember Route 66 since I was about 4 years old. We used to live in Arizona. We go back and forth because my mom was from Acoma, my dad from Jemez. So we went to a lot of festivities in Acoma on Route 66. And then another thing that we used to go to was the Flagstaff Intertribal Ceremonial. It's just a kind of equivalent to the Gallup Ceremonial week because my dad's first cousin Tony Toya used to play in the Navajo band because he was a trumpeter. I mean, he was a bugler in the military, and he carried it over to his trumpet playing days with the ceremonial and also the Gallup ceremonial eventually. And also, my Acoma relatives used to always talk about selling pottery along Route 66, and my Mesita relatives also would say the same. And I remember looking for that little silhouette of a jackrabbit along Route 66, and it will have miles on it, and then that's how many miles it would be to a certain jackrabbit or jackrabbit curio store. But they were all over the place. They were on top of the hill, down in the valley, and that was pretty spectacular. And also the haboobs. In Arizona, we would see, oh no, here comes a big old wall of dust, a big dust storm. I remember those days. It was pretty spectacular.
Michael, those are some good memories. And you know what, brother? You just made me think about something. And Ron, maybe you can help us out here. But there's that rock formation right there on I-40 as you get into Laguna Pueblo heading west. And every few years, somebody comes along and paints it like a moccasin. They'll put like colors on it, make it look like beadwork. You know what I'm talking about. Ron, does that have any connection to Route 66? You know that landmark.
Well, I don't know if it really has a direct connection. I know that Route 66 basically, takes you right past that area. And there are others that are just between Tohajale, our Navajo Nation chapter that's just outside of Albuquerque and close to Laguna. There are a number of places where, people, I guess, did modern rock art, basically advertisements that they painted on the red rock areas and stuff. But there's also another little place out there that's looks like a pile of hamburgers. And so one of our tribal brothers, Mike Canfield's dad, used to call it Hamburger Hill. And so you pass by that, and I think it might have been part of the genesis of Laguna Burger, the franchise our own franchise for feast day hamburgers. But there are places like that have been decorated very effectively by tribal members, and they also were the inspiration in part, for what we now own at Laguna as the Route 66 Hotel Casino. And I know that Delene, is aware that we exist out east from Gallup, and hopefully we can team up on doing some things or welcoming folks that you're going to be welcoming there in Gallup. And I was just going to mention something to her too, that there's probably some archival footage of me in the Gallup ceremonial parades, because as a kid, I grew up from age 0 through 5 in Gallup. So I was on Route 66 all the time, and traveling back and forth to Laguna to visit relatives, and then eventually our family moved home. But yes, it's now you'll find major advertising that goes on Route 66, advertising things at travel centers, at both at the Route 66 Hotel Casino, then out further west at Casablanca at the Dancing Eagle. which really serves pretty much as a sort of a gateway to Acoma Pueblo, Sky City Cultural Center and Museum. So a lot of those things that I just mentioned quickly, were products of what Route 66 and eventually Interstate 40 have brought to us, and that's tourism, traffic, and their buying power, and their desire to learn more about native ways of life and to eat some native food. And this includes also the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center in Albuquerque.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ron. Troy, I want to go back to you because listening to Ron talk about, anyone who drives like from Albuquerque all the way to Flagstaff, you see all the signs, you see the trading posts, and it's making me feel really nostalgic right now. And tell us more. I mean, what was really the heyday of Route 66, and when did it become such an iconic part of the American identity?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it's pretty interesting because we're celebrating this centennial, but the actual Route 66 got decommissioned as an official highway route, in the early 80s, which means for 40% of this centennial it actually didn't exist as an official thing, but it doesn't go away. And that's because it's like the impact has been so big. In a lot of ways, probably the heyday, I would think, is when cars got good enough to fly down the road pretty good. But it's both travel from people going through from far away, but also people, traveling, in across their communities. You look at some interesting things like in the 1930s and 40s. You look at some of the data, a lot more pickup trucks started to get sold to native peoples. And there's a good reason for that because the roads were getting good. And it meant traveling, things like that. And so, by the 50s and 60s, I think in a lot of ways where we see, one of the callers mentioned the De Anza Hotel. We see a lot of these things that are set up for travelers. And, one of the neat parts about it, is that people weren't just traveling through to get, to Los Angeles or Chicago on the end. They were traveling through because they wanted to experience this place. It was important, thinking about saying like, when you mention these rock formations, that's what people were like, I'm on the lookout for that. I want to know what it means to live here. I want to know what the signifiers are of being here and that sort of thing. So with that heyday, it really is, we think about it in the, it becomes this big cultural icon, but it never went away. And that's pretty surprising in some ways, but it shouldn't be because, Delene mentioned you've got all that beauty out there in Gallup and people want to experience stuff like that. You run into a lot of travelers from other countries, and what they want to do is get in a big car and drive. That's their experience of America. So.
Well, that's interesting because I know in a lot, like you mentioned, international travelers, and they don't have open roadways like we do here in the United States, right? So I can see that draw from international tourists who would want to come here.
Yeah, and it's not just drive and don't stop. I mean, they want to stop. And, that's one of the interesting things for Native peoples when I said sort of like defining yourself, because, when you get somebody from the outside, they're sometimes asking that question, who are you? Why are you here? How do you live here? And they're asking because they're intrigued. They're like, this is a pretty amazing place. How do you live here in that way? And one of the reasons I think why, even though officially, the road is not commissioned as Route 66 anymore, a lot of it's I-40 and a few other roads, is because it also existed before it was even Route 66. And this was a landscape and a way to travel, across America, and even before it was America. And so, as a country. And so in a lot of ways, that's also about the staying power, because these stories of your family and your history, they go way back because of that.
Wow. Well, we're going to have to wrap up this conversation. I'm sorry, we're out of time, but we need to talk about Route 66 more on this show. And again, this centennial is going to go on the whole year. So maybe we'll revisit this topic more later this year on Native America Calling. But for now, we do have to wrap up this conversation. But thank you to our three guests who joined us today, Troy Levata, Ron Solomon, and Delene Santillanes. And also our callers who joined the conversation as well. Really appreciate you folks joining us. Elizabeth listening in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Michael in Jemez Pueblo. Keep those calls going, folks. And also join us again tomorrow for another conversation. We'll be speaking with members of the 2026 class of the Center for Native American Youth's Champions for Change. I'm Sean Spruce. You've been listening to the one, the only Native America Calling. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Hear that? That's everything tribal college faculty do for their students on Fast Forward. Because if one tried to say it in real time, they'd be here all day. They teach, guide, comfort, and connect. And for that, the community is grateful. Learn more at mostthoroughdjobdescription.com. The American Indian College Fund supports this program.
They give extensions, cheer progress, share laughter, create calm, and allow reflection. They inspire hope, share wisdom, guide gently, validate healing.
Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiverresources. AARP supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.